Hey everybody, and welcome to Azure Flash News, episode 91. Hey Matt, how's it going?
Going really well, Mark. Episode 91. Wow, that's a long time running. So how many years does that equate to?
Gosh, we've been doing the show, I think now 3 years? 3 years we've been doing this.
Years. Oh,
Yeah,
ahead of your time. That's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
And of course, we probably had a bit of a break here with the disruption that what is it called? COVID,
yeah.
coronavirus.
This little thing. What was it again? It hasn't been in the news or anything. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
shouldn't make light of it, but I suppose. But yeah, it's really probably disrupted some of our Azure Flash News podcasts. So
it really
I
has.
guess,
It really has.
yeah.
It's made it a little bit more challenging. Rick and I were able to do a show not too long ago, uh, but here we are back again. And as you notice, for those of you watching, this is not Rick. Matt, for maybe
This
those,
is not Rick.
no, this is not Rick. This is not Rick. No, your name is not Rick. Matt, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for everybody who's watching?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Matt Lunzer. I am a cloud solution architect based out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a counterpart of Rick. So I've done a couple of these in the past. So if you've been kind of a dedicated fan of Azure Flash News, perhaps you've seen me before, but it's been a while. So it's good to be back.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back, Matt. Okay, so let's see let's see what we have on tap. I'll just kind of go over a little bit. First of all, we have an announcement about some WVD announcements, right? So that's really good.
WD,
Yep.
Windows Virtual
Windows
Desktop. Yep.
Virtual Desktop, yes. And then we have a couple of three announcements about Windows Virtual Desktop. We have one about kind of an update of the service. Then we also have something kind of to do with that around Azure Firewall. Then even a little bit more, a nice theme going on here. A little bit more about Azure Windows Virtual Desktop, with some stuff with kind of one of the specific apps you might want to run there. I'll leave it I won't steal my own thunder yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one is about VMware. It turns out we actually have a really big partnership with VMware and Azure, and we can kind of go into that. And then one more that's kind of related to the VMware is Azure Dedicated Host, and so we'll talk a little bit about some new capabilities there. So why don't we go ahead and get started here, Matt? Why don't you give us a quick introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop? I know you've been doing a lot with Windows Virtual Desktop lately. Why don't you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. Yeah, so Windows Virtual Desktop is a Azure native virtual desktop infrastructure environment that you can deploy in the cloud. And given given what we kind of introed with, coronavirus, COVID, has forced a lot of people to be socially distant. Employers are requiring people work from home. We've seen an incredible spike in usage of this service, because at the end of the day, what Windows Virtual Desktop allows people to do is work remotely. So employees can literally be anywhere, so long as they have internet connectivity and a modern browser. Generally, everybody has that these days. They can connect to a remote desktop and perform useful work. So it is a service that basically is hosted in Azure and allows enterprise, small, medium business, employers to offer a virtualized desktop in the cloud for their employees to, run line of business applications and otherwise, all hosted in Azure.
And why would running Windows Virtual Desktop, in Azure be better than or be different than running it in your own data center?
So one of the challenges, as I kind of mentioned, Windows Virtual Desktop has really proliferated. And I think part of that proliferation is due in part to the fact that just the amount of remote workers that have have become a need due to the requirement for people to work outside the office has led to a tremendous amount of need to provide that remote worker capability to employees. And the result of that has been that most, if organizations have a virtual desktop environment in place today in the data center, it's probably not sized to handle the volume of remote workers that now are required to be working remotely. So, for example, maybe you've got a remote worker solution based upon a virtual desktop platform that's designed to support about 1,000 concurrent users. But let's assume that you're an organization that has roughly 5,000 people. And now, due to COVID and the fact that people can't work from the office anymore, now maybe 4,500 roughly of that, organization are working from home. And now you've got more of a demand than you have supply. You simply don't have the infrastructure capacity in the data center to support that volume of use. And in that scenario, perhaps you look to cloud. And the reason why you would look to cloud, of course, is because you have on-demand compute, on-demand hardware where you can spin up, for example, a Windows virtual desktop to meet the needs of that newly emerged remote
Yeah,
workforce. So
and
that's a very common scenario that serves as kind of the springboard for Windows virtual desktop
yeah,
adoption.
yeah. I mean, there's just been a huge move to stay at home work. I mean, obviously over the last, 3 months or whatever. So I think this has led
Mm-hmm.
to a really new, renewed interest in using virtual desktop technology, and because of the quick scale up, people have had to look to the cloud. So actually, that's kind of all an intro to what is actually a really big announcement. This article that I'm kind of sharing on the screen here is actually a really short article, but this is actually a really big update to the Windows Virtual Desktop in Azure capability.
Yes, it is. So, like most things in these hyperscale platforms, Azure, obviously, there's others. There is this constant evolution of these services in order to deliver on requirements that customers are asking of the platform. Most of the development life cycle for in Azure are actually led by the users of the service. So we're getting this constant feedback loop from customers on things that they feel should be improved on the service in order to help them expand adoption, or perhaps take advantage of it for the first time, or maybe just optimize things, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, of course, holds true with Windows Virtual Desktop and any other service that's available in Azure. So what's kind of transpired over the last several months is the release of Windows Virtual Desktop into the ARM portal, the Azure
Oh,
Resource
right.
Management portal. So the initial release of Windows Virtual Desktop, let's say it was 12 months ago, pre-COVID, was largely delivered through PowerShell commandlets. A
Yeah,
lot of people kind of considered it to be a non-ARM based deployment, but you know what? It was kind of enough to get you started on Windows Virtual
right.
Desktop and delivered an effective way to take advantage of that service. But it had a few shortcomings, and of course, Microsoft knew that. So, just with any other service that's hosted on the platform, it's evolved, it's taken on new capabilities, and as a part of that, now the Windows Virtual Desktop has a complete portal experience. So
Yeah.
what that kind of provides, Mark, I think, is kind of a democratized way of implementing this service. In let's call it V.1, if you're really astute with PowerShell, it wasn't that big of a deal. If you were working with
Yeah,
someone that was astute with PowerShell, you could get it
right.
stood up. But it
Yeah.
required PowerShell knowledge, and for some people, that might be a little intimidating,
And
or
and
maybe they
also
just don't
it's
have a background in it.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit more challenging to sort of imagine what you're building if you're using just some command lines and to like, what do I have out there? Oh, I have to run a command line to do it. So while it's
Right.
very efficient, it's also a little bit more hard to use. So
Yeah.
we've really seen a move into a full front end portal experience, and for people to be able to just go into the portal and fire one of these things up.
That's right. So, for those of you that have access to Azure, if you go into portal.azure.com, you authenticate. You should be able to search for the service Windows Virtual Desktop, and voila, you're going to see
Yeah.
the service there available for you to provision a host pool, which is really kind of where you get started with the platform. So again, just democratizing access to the service, making it easier for customers to adopt, and I think you'll continue to see a large volume of evolution in that service, which is
Yeah.
now a first party service in Azure, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. I mean, just want to emphasize to people that, of course, you can use multi-session. So in other words, if you spin up a
Mm,
VM, you can actually have multiple people on that VM. That's a unique capability in Azure that you just can't get anywhere else because it's actually Windows 10, right? This isn't
yes,
Windows Server.
that's the asterisk. So a lot of virtualized remote desktop environments typically were provisioned on Windows Server. because Windows Server supported terminal services or evolved to become remote desktop services, which supported a many-to-one use. So you could have a core set of line of business applications deployed on a Windows Server, and you could, have 5, 10, 15, 20 employees on that single host in order to
Yeah.
run their line of business applications and perform their jobs.
Right.
With Windows Virtual Desktop, we actually have spawned a new version, if you will, of Windows 10 called
Yeah.
Windows 10 Multi-Session, where you
That's
can have
right.
a true client operating system provisioned in a Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's a client experience, which is something that most end users are going to be obviously quite familiar and intimate with. It offers robust compatibility because it's a client operating system. It's not a
Right.
server operating system.
Right.
And it has other benefits too. Obviously, you don't need RDS CALs. So there might be some cost benefits from running Windows 10 multi-session as
Right.
well, and it's available exclusively in Azure. So if you spawn Windows Virtual Desktop this afternoon, you can actually provision a host pool based upon Windows 10 multi-session and experience it firsthand. It's all built in, very turnkey in that regard, and a way to really kind of take advantage of what that has to offer.
Yeah, so suffice it to say, if you're out there watching and you're thinking, man, we really need to expand our capacity for our virtual desktop environment, just know that in Azure today there is an updated portal experience and it's ready to go for you to give and try out. Um, but I'm going to transition now to sort of the next announcement, which is a continuation of the Windows Virtual Desktop, experience, and that is, how do we secure Windows Virtual Desktop environment? How do we go about that? It's deployed in a virtual network, and then we put Azure Firewall in front of that. So that gives us a chance to, use a firewall network virtual appliance as a part of this architecture to really help secure all of the traffic going in and out of this environment.
That's right. Yeah. So my dad would probably describe Azure Firewall as the bee's knees. I mean, this is a first party. You haven't heard that term before, have you?
Oh, I have.
It's
I
kind of
love it.
funny. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, anyways. So yeah, Azure Firewall is a first. So much like Windows Virtual Desktop is a first party platform service. You don't have to manage or maintain the management infrastructure that typically has to be managed for a remote desktop services environment. It's maintained by the
Right.
platform. You're just
Right.
deploying virtual machines into a host pool, and you're responsible for the lifecycle of those virtual machines. But a lot of the complexity that comes with a remote desktop VDI type environment is maintained by the platform. Same
Right.
thing holds true for Azure Firewall.
Right.
Azure Firewall is a stateful packet inspection appliance. Nobody should be surprised by that. It's a firewall. That's what firewalls
Right.
are built intended to
Right.
do.
Right.
And it is also a platform service. So again, you don't have to deploy virtual machines, put software on top of those virtual machines
No.
and maintain them in the traditional sense. Instead, that's all accounted for by the platform. So another platform service. But
Yeah.
it has a lot of cohesion with Windows Virtual Desktop because, as you alluded to, Mark, Windows Virtual Desktop, at the end of the day, it's kind of virtual machines that get deployed into a virtual network.
Right.
And these virtual machines are going to need connectivity outside of this virtual network. And most enterprise organizations or security conscious organizations want that traffic to flow through a appliance that scrutinizes that traffic.
Right.
Azure Firewall is the perfect coupling for Windows Virtual Desktop. Not that you can't use third-party firewalls, you can. There's many out there, and we
Yeah.
certainly
For sure.
see a lot of them deployed, and we certainly know the value that comes along with them. But if you're looking for kind of a turnkey first-party service, Azure Firewall can be deployed in concert with Windows Virtual Desktop and do a couple things. The first thing is it can provide internet connectivity for your virtual machines.
Right.
So if your users sign into Windows Virtual Desktop and maybe they need to access Office 365, maybe they need to access GitHub to download, if it's a developer
Source
deployment.
code or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they need to watch Azure Flash News on YouTube, right? Whatever the case might be, they need
Of
internet.
course they're watching Azure Flash News on YouTube, Matt. Of course.
That's right.
That's the primary use case. I'm pretty sure it's listed down here lower in the article.
That's right. So you want to filter and you want to secure that traffic. So Azure Firewall is capable of providing that capability where it can effectively allow virtual machines and Windows Virtual Desktop to have internet connectivity.
Right.
Another capability that it has is it can provide traffic inspection when accessing applications on premises. So
Right.
maybe you're running applications in Windows Virtual Desktop that um, are client installed applications that need to connect to back-end data sources or servers that exist in your data center.
Right.
A lot of the capabilities within Azure are hybrid, meaning we intend for that to be feasible. So maybe you've got a site-to-site tunnel, like a VPN connected to Azure, or maybe an express route, which is our private connectivity offering. And
Yeah.
you want traffic destined to those backends to also be scrutinized or limited. You can route that traffic through Azure Firewall for traffic going back to on premises.
What I always
So
think about in this scenario is if somebody's using Windows or if somebody's trying to get developers easy use, if they're at home, then they've either got to travel across the VPN and, get to like they're developing locally, then they're traveling across the VPN. But if they're on Windows Virtual Desktop, they're developing locally. But then they still need access on-prem and to those on-prem resources like a SQL database or whatever.
right.
So then they travel through the Azure firewall on the way on-prem, use that as the firewall gateway to on-prem, and then can still access that SQL server.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you've got multitudes of defense in depth. When you sign into Windows Virtual Desktop, not to get too far in the weeds, but you're authenticating with your Azure Active Directory credentials. So you're kind of
Hmm.
coming in through the front door with your identity hosted in Azure, and you can provide, place scrutiny on that identity and apply conditional access, such as require multi-factor,
Yeah.
authentication. You can use your identity as kind of a perimeter defense. And then once people are successfully authenticated, they've landed on Windows Virtual Desktop, they're running Windows 10 multi-session. And at that point, as they access resources either in Azure or on the public internet, or maybe even in the corporate network, that traffic can flow through Azure Firewall and provide, what we call east-west traffic inspection for
Right.
going back to for perhaps the corporate network, or north-south traffic inspection for traffic, going out to the public internet. So
Yeah.
very nice coupling to provide, interior security, if you will, for your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. And again, Azure Firewall is a first-party service; it couples with it very well. But you can also use third-party
Yeah.
firewall platforms in addition to that, if that happens to be your
Your
preference.
preference. Yeah. And I just think that I always like to say about things like Azure Firewall. After you deploy Azure Firewall, you don't have to patch it. You don't have to upgrade it. It auto scales. If you need to go bigger, you just go to the portal and you slide a slider bar a little bit bigger. So it's a really great way to keep your focus on deploying business value applications and leave a lot of the infrastructure management to Microsoft. So
Absolutely.
I was thinking about moving on to the next one. This one's kind of a short announcement, but for those who are managing or who are thinking of using Windows Virtual Desktop, then you really ought to know about this. But there is a media optimization for Teams that is now available in preview, and as a lot of organizations have done over the last 2 or 3 months, there's been an explosion in the usage of platforms like Teams. And if you are kind of going all in on the virtual desktop and virtual workplace, you might have people working on Windows Virtual Desktop and needing to use Teams to meet virtually with people. So there is now a way to kind of handle that audio and video locally, to kind of pipe in the audio and video locally. Because if you think about it, the camera is not on Windows Virtual Desktop machine. The camera is on your machine, the
Right.
client's machine. So we needed to make that work. It's there. It's now in preview. So go check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Windows Virtual Desktop is a service. A lot of people will call it just kind of a VDI based offering that gets into the definition of VDI, but Virtual Desktop to run Windows 10. You're signing into Windows Virtual Desktop to run applications. Windows
Right.
10 is obviously the underlying operating system that perhaps provides the platform in
Right.
which to install those applications. And Teams has proliferated, much like Windows Virtual Desktop has enabled remote workers. So has Teams. I think the statistic I heard recently, Mark, was Teams is now up to 75 million daily active users. I mean, it is a mega
Now let's
application.
let let's just stop and think about that. That's daily active users, you're saying.
Right? It is daily active users,
That is
and
a hu- Yeah, and
And
that is huge. I mean, that means people are on, sending instant messages, getting on a call, whatever, and 75 million people are doing that. That is just
right.
really astounding. That's an astounding
That
number.
is an astounding, and kudos to obviously this is a little self-serving, but kudos to Microsoft to building a platform that can scale to that number in a very rapid way, and still provide a very performant experience.
Yeah.
Tangential, we just published something, I believe, in the Azure blog about how Teams is constructed based upon a microservices architecture
Yep.
in Azure, and leverages many of the Azure services that we all have access to. And it gives some detail
And
about how that application is deployed. And it's really informative.
and that is an excellent segue because at some point, well, okay, I'll just admit to all the viewers out there, I went through and looked at all of the posts from the last 2 or 3 months to try and make some new shows, and I actually have a show kind of teed up that's all about running. Microsoft runs on Azure. And there are
That's
three or
right.
four really great articles about how Microsoft runs on Azure, and Teams is one of those.
Yeah.
So you guys can look forward to that coming up here pretty soon.
Yeah.
So
We
anyway,
eat
so
our own dog food. It's a good way to put that. And that's
yes,
something that you certainly should challenge your platform companies, is to find out if they're actually, leveraging what they actually
right,
provide to their customers. And that is to some extent a testament in terms of whether they believe in the platform or not.
right,
Uh, Microsoft runs a tremendous amount of internal and external services inside of Azure
yep,
due to the faith in the platform and the ability
yep,
for it to handle the magnitude of the workloads that are there.
yeah, yeah. That is awesome. Love it. Okay,
But but yeah, Teams. So real quickly on Teams. So Teams in Windows Virtual Desktop is a thing. If you want to make Teams available to your remote users, you can either deploy the bits on their
mm,
physical form factors, whatever they're using, whether it's BYOD or whether you provide them with a
right,
managed device like a Surface, for example, or you can make Teams available to them through Windows Virtual Desktop. So instead, you have kind of a centralized image management
right,
platform, if you will, that gets deployed into Windows Virtual Desktop. And through this Teams optimization capability, people can actually run Teams in Windows Virtual Desktop without having to have the bits installed
right,
locally.
right.
So now, whether they have BYOD, whether they have a managed device, whether they're in Caribou, whether they're in their corporate network, it really doesn't matter.
No,
It really, I'm overusing this term now, I feel like, but it democratizes access. It allows you to
yeah,
quickly provide that application to your end user community.
yeah,
And the optimization that we're referring to is that with Teams optimized in Windows Virtual Desktop, chat and some of the non-audio video capabilities all occur within the Windows Virtual Desktop ecosystem.
right,
But you want to commence audio or video, much like we're kind of doing for this YouTube stream. That is using a protocol called WebRTC. I think it's real-time communication.
oh wow,
Anyways, that execution actually gets controlled through Windows Virtual Desktop and ultimately the client that's connecting to Windows Virtual Desktop. But the audio and the video stream is actually occurring from the end user's local client.
yeah,
And what that does is ensures that that traffic isn't being delivered over, an RDP encapsulated traffic, which
right,
is not well suited to support those type
right.
of capabilities. So the end result is you get a very effective Teams experience with Teams optimization. So
So in other
definitely
words, the
take advantage of that.
application runs on Windows Virtual Desktop, but the video and audio goes directly from your local endpoint directly out to the Teams platform.
Yeah, you can kind of think of that as being, network parlance, almost like a split tunnel thing,
Split
where call
tunnel, yeah,
control, chatting, maybe accessing a Teams channel, that all kind of occurs through, the Windows Virtual Desktop
right,
deployment. But the audio and video capability of Teams, which again, you just mentioned, the camera, for example,
yeah,
all of that happens locally through your local device and,
yeah.
and provides, for most cases, a very performant experience. And I think that that'll be kind of the way forward with Teams on Windows Virtual Desktop, as we continue to kind of progress the
Right.
service.
All right. So, all right. Now here's another really big one. VMware, Microsoft. We have a partnership with VMware, and it is available. And we even have kind of a new refresh of this partnership. This is a first-party service available in Azure where you can actually go to the Azure portal and say, "I want some VMware," and have a VMware deployment in Azure available to you to run some of your applications, maybe that you just want to migrate to Azure while they're still on VMware.
Right, right. Yeah, if you have the need for speed to get to the cloud, a first-party VMware offering in Azure is the way to
Did
do that.
did you just
Uh,
make a did you just make a Top Gun reference?
was that Top Gun? Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Top Gun. Need for
I feel the
Speed. Yeah.
need.
Hey,
I feel the
Top Gun 2
need.
is coming out, I
I
heard,
feel
this summer.
that's
Have you heard
right.
about that? Oh, I'm
Maverick.
kind of amped about that. Maverick is back. Goose isn't back, but
No, he's
Maverick
not.
is back. Yeah, but yeah, look out
He's I think
for.
he's I think he's supposed to be a teacher at Top Gun now. So now he's
He's
an
kind of in the
instructor.
Tom Skerritt role, right?
I
He's the
guess,
teacher. There's
yeah.
going to be some young gung ho
Yeah.
pilot who,
Hot shot.
hot shot. Yep, yeah. We all kind of wanted to be, Tom Cruise back in the day. I remember watching that movie over and over again because I used to sell electronics. This was back in my, I guess, college days, and Top Gun had been around for a while. But to demonstrate the power of the audio video capabilities in our electronics session, we just replayed Top Gun over and over and over again. So every day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, I would watch Top Gun. So I
There
have
you
a
go.
lot of
You're a Top Gun aficionado.
it's etched in my brain. It's like
Yeah.
stored on the hard drive, for better or for worse. Anyways,
All
all
right.
right, back
Anyway,
to what
we digress. We digress.
we digress.
But this is a VMware first-party service where you can go and requisition a VMware cluster ready to go for you to use. I mean, does this connect it to our virtual networks? I mean, can you just like move your OVMs or whatever they are to Azure and VMDKs or whatever they are to Azure and run it here and have it
Right.
connected to your
Yeah.
your virtual network?
That's right. That's right. That's the intent. So it is a kind of a hardware-based solution, but you can spawn it very quickly in a traditional kind of cloud type model, and ultimately deploy a VMware cluster where you then in return can migrate, on-premises based VMware deployments to Azure in a very quick fashion. And not only in Azure, but you can deploy it into this VMware on Azure offering. So you're not doing the conversion from the VMDK format, which is the native VMware format, to, not surprising, VHD format, which is,
Right.
underneath the hood, Microsoft Azure is running Hyper-V. That shouldn't surprise anyone. But if you want to migrate to infrastructure as a service, that requires this conversion, which also
Right.
implies you're no longer using your VMware tool sets, your VMware knowledge to manage your virtual machine fleet. So there's some learning that has to come with that. And there's benefits with that too. But for organizations that want to move fast, like let's say, for example, you want to drain a data center, you've got a contract that is upcoming and you want to basically exit out of a data center facility fast, this offers that. Or, and maybe this was been pre-COVID, but let's say you had some real estate within a data center that you have within your own office that you need to reclaim for office space. Well, probably don't need to do that
Well,
anymore with COVID. So this isn't really one of those opportunities, but who knows?
well,
Things will change.
you
Oh,
you might though. You might need that space for social distancing, maybe.
oh, that is great. You're right. So
Yeah.
yes. So
So
now if you need those cubicles 6 feet apart, maybe
right.
that floor that contains your data center could be reclaimed and repurposed for that purpose. So, anyways, you're migrating VMware-based environments very fast to a first-party VMware offering in Azure that is supported by VMware, supported by Microsoft, not provided by a third party. So, what we
No.
can offer in that capability is not beholden to some third party firm that is developing software. Instead, it's a first party service that we are developing in concert, with VMware. And it's a great way to, lift and shift very quickly to the cloud. And then from there, as you alluded to, Mark, take advantage of technologies like
Yeah.
ExpressRoute to stitch that VMware on Azure offering into a traditional virtual network environment where you can commingle applications both in VMware and in Azure. And over
Yeah.
time, as necessary, make decisions in terms of what you want to do with your, VM-based deployment, transform it, migrate to SaaS, whatever the case might be. But it is definitely a nice way to do a cloud migration very fast and maintain the tool set that you have and leverage the expertise you've already built.
Yeah. Yeah. That is awesome. So, for those of you out there, if you guys are looking for a way to utilize your VMware experience, tool set, tooling, all of that stuff, but you still want to be able to go to the cloud and you want to be able to get there quickly, this Azure VMware solution is a really great way to do it. So, I highly check everybody to check that out. I'm actually
And
gonna.
I will say one last thing
Okay.
on that, Mark, is the VMware and Azure offering is really intended to be for a fairly large VMware deployment.
Yeah.
If you've got a couple of VMs and you're like, well, we run those on just a simple VM cluster and it'd be nice to move those into Azure, this probably isn't the right offering for you. You'd be better off looking to move those VMs to infrastructure as a service. But once you get to a certain threshold, and I don't know what that number would be, but if you've got a fairly large sized VMware cluster on-prem, that would be a great target for VMware and Azure. So just keep in mind kind of the size consideration and where whether that makes sense to go to VMware on Azure, perhaps just IaaS.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good note, Matt. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's kind of transition off and talk a little bit about Azure Dedicated Host. Now, this is kind of like a little bit of an anti-pattern, sort of, if you think about it. For cloud, right? I mean, the whole point of the cloud is for us to all share and really scale up. But Azure Dedicated Host is actually the ability to identify a specific host and then to pay for the whole host and then to have nobody else on it. And there are reasons for this, maybe. Sometimes they're licensing, sometimes it's security, but this is a service that we have in Azure that if you needed a dedicated machine, you can do that. And so, but in addition to that, we're actually talking a little bit about some new capabilities and benefits of the Azure Dedicated Host Service.
Yeah, that's right. You nailed it, Mark, in terms of kind of what the value proposition of a dedicated host is. Hopefully, it doesn't surprise anyone on the stream here that, to get economies of scale, we have shared infrastructure, and that's
Yep.
how we can deliver an effective service fast and at a very competitive price.
Yep.
But due to compliance, regulatory needs, maybe security falls under that umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
There are some customers. Licensing is a great example. Require a dedicated host. But what dedicated hosts didn't have up until this point was the ability to leverage kind of this reservations model.
Right.
So Azure Reservations is, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is the ability to kind of commit to a resource upfront for a period of time, let's say 1 or 3 years for simplistic purposes. And in the value, the benefit you get from making that 1 or 3 year commitment is you get a significant discount on the service.
Right.
Your commitment is you're going to run it for a year, you're going to run it for 3 years. In return for that commitment, you get a sizable discount. That had not been available
Right.
to this dedicated host model up until now.
Right.
But one of the new announcements that have been made as a part of kind of what we're surfacing here is that Azure dedicated host reservations is now available. So in the
Right.
event that you do need to run a dedicated host, and that you're going to run it for a workload that's going to be 24/7 by 365,
Yep.
and maybe it's an application that's, long running. You anticipate it being around for a year, for 3 years, whatever the case might be. If that's you, one way to get a nice discount on leveraging Azure Dedicated Hosts is by looking at this reservation model.
Yeah.
So be sure to check that out, and in doing so, see what discounts might be had by looking at different dedicated
Right.
intervals, 1 or 3 years.
Yeah, and then one more thing, there's a little bit more control for the platform updates for the dedicated hosts. And
Mm-hmm.
because you own the whole host, then we can offer you a little bit more control of when those updates happen. And so just check this out, folks. Really, if you need dedicated hosts and kind of see that from like a compliance point of view, or maybe from a control or a licensing point of view, please go check that out. I wanted to real quick ask Matt, if people want to contact you after the show, how would they do that?
Sure. One other quick snippet on dedicated
Okay.
hosts that most people don't know is I think on dedicated hosts, you can actually run what we call Hyper-V nested virtualization.
Oh,
So in the
right.
event that you actually want to run a hypervisor in Azure to migrate systems to Azure that aren't normally supported in Azure, like, I don't know, Windows 2003, some people still have those out there, maybe old
What?
versions of Red Hat, just as an example. You can actually deploy these into real Hyper-V
Got it.
deployment using nested virtualization on these dedicated hosts.
Yeah.
So kind of a sneaky little opportunity there that for some organizations they find to be attractive. But if you want to get a hold of me, I am, I guess, kind of old school in this sense. I feel like I should have a Twitter handle. I feel
Nah.
like I should have an Instagram page. Find me on this social platform, that social platform. Nah, you can just email me at matt.lunzer, LUNZER, at Microsoft.com.
Yeah.
That's a great way to get a hold of me. I am also on LinkedIn. So if you're listening to this
That's a
and
good one.
you would like to connect, I certainly welcome that. LinkedIn is another great way to do that. So just search for Matt Lunzer, and obviously I'm with Microsoft, and you'll find me and issue a connect. Maybe even mention to me that you heard me on Azure Flash
Yeah,
News. That would be really kind of fun to
yeah,
see, and would love to connect with
yeah.
you all. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, folks, if you want to contact me after this, you can either catch me on Twitter at mgarner, or you can email me. That's just fine. mgarner@microsoft.com. Totally fine. Just shoot me an email. And I guess that this is kind of, the end of the show. Thank you, Matt, so much for helping host the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having
Yeah.
me. This is a lot of fun to do that, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be on something
Yeah,
like this. So
it's
thank you.
great. No problem. Uh, just want to remind people you can catch us live on YouTube here, and we'll try and host a show once a week and maybe more than once a week during these times where we're trying to catch up on old shows. In addition to that, if you want to catch us, you can just view us on YouTube. You can also catch us on the podcast on either iTunes or on Google Play or actually on Stitcher as well. Feel free to catch us there. So, with that, I'll just say keep your keep. I think Rick always says, keep your hands on the keyboard and keep your head in the cloud. Although last week he said, keep your sanitized hands on the keyboard and keep your socially distant heads in the cloud. So, with that, we'll
And wear a mask.
your masked, socially distant head in the cloud. Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. And I will catch everybody later. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care, everyone.